إذا نتابع مع حضراتكم وصول السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي رئيس الجمهورية إلى العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة، إلى موقع القاعة التي ستحتضن هذا صانعي مؤتمر مصر الاقتصادي مصر 2022.
This is the three-day event which was called by the President early in September when he urged the government to organize this conference to discuss the current economic conditions and how to boost all sectors of our domestic economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the arrival of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to inaugurate Egypt Economic Conference, Egypt 2022.
وعلى مدار السنوات الثماني المنقضية قدمت نموذجا اقتصاديا مختلفا.
Egypt has presented a different economic example, maybe due to the changes that happened over the past decade. Egypt dealt with the different economic problems that were structural and from which the Egyptian economy has suffered for about 4 decades. Egypt dealt with these issues and these problems over the previous years with radical solutions rather than sedatives. Egypt has adopted a full economic structural reform, and the figures are not related to the Egyptian government data only like that of CAPMAS or others, but even on the level of the international financial institutions like the World Bank, IMF, Moody's, Fitch, and even the other institutions that the largest part of would be discussed in the sessions of this conference. All these institutions talked about the year of the pandemic COVID-19 2020. All the economies were suffering from economic difficulties due to the shutdown, and these institutions said that Egypt is one of few countries that achieved positive growth rates. This year was an obstacle to accelerating the growth rate. Yet, at least, and according to the economic reform package adopted by Egypt, rehabilitated and enabled the Egyptian economy to stand strong. Anyways, the measures undertaken by the government are applying the evaluation and the critical thinking of all the measures and the procedures made so as to correct the path and develop the agenda according to the developments. These are all the issues that are going to be discussed in the conference today, and a number of economists, politicians, political parties, members and parliamentarians would participate in this conference. And the conference would try to come up with solutions and answers to these difficulties and questions through the discussions about the future. And even the fiscal year 2021-2022, the Egyptian economy was able to achieve a growth rate of 6.6%. And it seems to be big, even if we're talking about some of the world problems, and in light of the inflation rates that has been recorded by a number of countries. And this makes us to talk about how can we contain and manage inflation And according to the Egyptian government, this is a kind of exported inflation because Egypt imports a lot of the inputs for manufacturing and industry.
قدمت مصر إذن مسارا تنمويا مختلفا
presented a different development path over the previous years based on reconsidering the structural problems of the Egyptian economy that has been caused over the previous 4 decades. And this would be the reason for spending a lot of expenses on infrastructure projects so that there would be a radical change that would enable the state to move forward with economic development. If we're talking about the targeted economic growth achieved even during the fiscal year 2021-2022, 6.6%, we're talking about what as announced during the National Conference for Youth in April 2016, when the state said that it does not target only figures and development rates, but it wants this to be reflected on the standard of living of citizens. Egypt launched a structural reform program for the Egyptian economy in November 2016. And the Egyptians have endured these reforms, and as the president has always said that they are the main element of the economic reform project. And the state tried to expand social protection programs and networks in light of these things so that poverty won't be inherited. And a number of projects were targeting alleviating poverty, and this led to success according to CAPMAS survey, as it announced for the first time that there has been poverty rate decrease in Egypt, and this is the first time over the previous 20 years. And the percentage of poor from the population now is 29.5%, and the state is trying to reduce it even further. And it has been reduced for the first time over the past 20 years. This conference we are attending today will discuss also the future of different economic files. If we're talking about a different reality and a different future, then of course the development of economy is one part of this development. And this conference will discuss the mechanisms and the means to develop the economy, and it will discuss also the roadmap for a more competitive economy. And we will discuss also the contribution of the private sector and how it can contribute to economic development and the GDP. This is what the state says. It said that through a number of phases, according to the state ownership document, it is going to exit a number of economic sectors. And a number of businessmen and investors, experts, economists, and academia, as well as government officials, have held a dialogue to discuss the state ownership document and to see the vision of Egyptian and foreign financial institutions regarding this document and to explore the horizons of cooperation. Cooperation is not just for the private sector to increase its share in the market, but to find direct solution through the state. And there has been a national dialogue also established by the state to listen to different visions, different viewpoints, discussing issues that are of paramount importance right now. And during that conference, all opinions were heard. And also today's economic conference is going to discuss the economic issues. The Egyptian National Dialogue Conference that was launched provided a number of questions that would be answered by this economic conference over these 3 days. They would discuss the requirements of the Egyptian economy as well as answer questions about managing the files of the Egyptian economy and implementing the government's agenda so that the citizens will be aware of the procedures made and the private sector would be able to cooperate with the public sector. There were a number of questions to be answered. If we talked also about the inflation rates that Egypt has faced since 2014, then the inflation rates are about to be reduced, and now the inflation rate is below 10%. So the state was able to reduce the inflation cost, although the inflation started to increase again worldwide. And this, of course, led to the increase of living expenses. And as the government says that the inflation in Egypt is an imported inflation, so this conference will discuss the inflation, will discuss the payment balance, and will discuss also how to overcome the problem of payment imbalance and how to reduce the imports of Egypt. So this conference would take place to discuss all these different visions that would enable the Egyptian economy to develop further and to reach $1 billion of exports. How can we achieve these rates? That is a just dream for the Egyptians, even in light of these difficulties and crises. The Egyptian economy was able to increase the exports of vegetable and fruit. In few months, the Egyptian exports in 2019 and 2020 was very high. So this is a philosophy of the government to deal with increasing the exports, and there are also investments in agricultural projects like the 1.5 million fidans to be reclaimed, and we have seen different phases of inaugurating and opening these agricultural lands, and there is an opportunity for the private sector to participate in this project and to invest in these opportunities that the state was able to make. And it's only the state was able to spend trillions of US dollars for developing the infrastructure, investing in agricultural projects, as well as reclaiming lands, to open the door for the private sector to establish partnerships with the state. There are a lot of investments in a lot of projects that could have never been implemented by the private sector alone, yet it was implemented by the state. And there are also investments in the first part of the years in ports and developing ports. So now Egypt has constructed and developed 4 ports. So it's the state that opened the door to the private sector to cooperate with it and to invest again in these fields. And the Egyptian government, when it came to announce the state ownership document, it said that the private sector is more efficient in managing such projects due to the experience of the private sector. And the state here is trying to pave the way for the private sector to increase its investments in these different projects and in these different sectors, be it infrastructure, land reclamation, energy projects. We are talking about Upper Egypt. In 7 years only, the state spent more than 1,100,000,000,000 Egyptian pounds in developing Upper Egypt, as Upper Egypt over the 25 years enjoyed only expenses of 900 billion Egyptian pounds to develop it. So the state in 7 years has spent more than that. Investments in different fields in Upper Egypt. And the state said that when it took these steps, it was taking it realizing that there is an opportunity for the private sector to implement these projects according to an agreement between the government and the private sector, so that it would be able to invest and look for opportunities and the profits needed. And this, of course, is the plan of the state. If we're talking about the National Dialogue Conference, this conference is linked, of course, to today's economic conference. And there was a great participation in these conferences on the level of the academia, the professionals, the politicians, the partisans from different political powers, so that they would be part of this national dialogue and part of the development of Egypt. And they are all committed to present these visions and to be a part of the economic reform programs according to the agendas. They can participate in cultural, economic, social reform. And this is all being discussed now in the national dialogue. And on a more specialized level, there is an opportunity in the field of economy to hold an in-depth discussion with all the political powers and all the representatives of the different groups to discuss the solutions for all the difficulties. In this economic conference, over these 3 days, there will be a number of sessions that will discuss different topics pertaining to the management of economy, the capital market, as well as all issues related to the economic reform in Egypt. They will discuss the plans to be made by the government over the coming years. And this would be discussed over the coming sessions of this conference, as everyone is represented in this conference. And we will listen to different opinions and different viewpoints from the different participants in this conference. President El-Sisi said that the Egyptians can discuss different issues so long as they realize the nature of the problems and the solutions that should be presented, because this is related to the management of the economy. It is the state that decided to give the opportunity to the private sector for more investments on its part over the previous years according to specific mechanisms, specific conditions. And now the state will take steps for exiting some economic activities. The state will exit some sectors totally and would give the opportunity to the private sector to manage these projects and to be part of it. And the state will leave its full shares in national projects and national investments. So all these things are going to be discussed during the conference. And the state ownership document would be also presented with the different visions and remarks during this conference to achieve a more competitive, flexible economy, as this is the objective of this conference. It's the state that wants competitiveness, so it tries to achieve neutrality between all competitors. All the projects will be discussed and all the ideas would be implemented. We listen to different speakers on the political level, the economic level, and we listen to different experts and economists during the sessions of this conference. And by the end of every session, there would be a number of outcomes after listening to the comments of everyone. And these outcomes would be the document for the state, the political parties, and the private sector to work on the development of the Egyptian economy. Once more, all issues are going to be presented, and also they are going to discuss the reduction of the public debt. And in an event, President El-Sisi was keen on talking to the Minister of Finance to speak to the Egyptians about the structure of the Egyptian debt and how the state is dealing with these debts, because there should be an open discussion about it, and the state is going to present this so that the partisans, the political parties, the parliamentarians, the experts and economists would listen to each other's views. The Egyptians want to change the reality as they have changed it over the past 10 years. The Egyptians were able over this decade to overcome a lot of challenges, and the world economy is suffering from a lot of difficulties, so different solutions should be implemented. And a lot of economists and non-economists say that the geopolitical changes taking place in the world has overshadowed the price of food products, energy, the economic growth, and a lot of people see that the phase we are going through now would be a turning point in the world, and accordingly economy with all its needs would differ, of course, so the economy is going to differ. And now President El-Sisi is heading to the conference room. Peace be upon you. Welcome to today's conference. I'm so glad to meet you. Please be seated. Your Excellency President El-Sisi, the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we would like to welcome you today from the capital of the new republic, from the capital that was constructed to turn the dream into reality and the hope into a reality. We are witnessing today the Egyptian Economic Conference under the auspices of President El-Sisi to discuss the future of the Egyptian economy with a wide participation from experts, specialists, businessmen, private sector, political parties, to share visions and to come up with a roadmap for a more competitive economy at a time where a lot of challenges are facing world. Over the previous 8 years, a lot of challenges had faced the world, and every challenge made Egypt stronger and more persistent to continue the path for construction and development. Our country is beautiful, full of good, and it is always under the eyes of people. We have been through a lot of difficulties and we were up to each one of them. In the 30th of June, the Egyptians stood before another type of colonization that tried to divide us, and with a decision, Egypt came back to the Egyptians. We opened a new chapter and we started constructing Egypt. The challenges were not easy. Weak infrastructure, problem with energy, long queues, 60% of unplanned buildings, terrorism that costed us a lot of martyrs, economic losses that reached $386 million. We will fight them, and at the same time we will work while we go through this battle. We fought terrorism and restored our security back. We reconstructed the state institutions. We have dug a new Suez Canal and proved to the whole world that we are able to do it. We have put a comprehensive reform program based on radical solutions. The real hero is the Egyptian nation. We developed the transportation system and we launched a national program for networks, 7,000 kilometers of new roads with a cost of £310 billion. And we have made a lot of achievements through developing the electricity network with a cost of £1.5 trillion. We supported industry. We constructed 17 industrial complexes, 4 integrated furnished industrial zones, and we rehabilitated the ports with £129 billion. 296 unsafe areas were rehabilitated and developed with a cost of £300 billion, and 30 new cities were established. We restructured the economy radically, and we have put an end to the black market for hard currency to attract foreign investments and to support national industry that has suffered for long years. And in parallel to the reform program, we implemented different projects for social protection to support the most needy segments. We structured the support and subsidy system with a budget of £87 billion annually. Takaful and Karama project with an annual budget of £25 billion. We achieved the dream of decent life through a national project with the objective of improving the quality of life of 60 million citizens in the Egyptian villages. The 100 million health campaign checked and examined all Egyptians, and here we launched the first phase of the universal health coverage program with a cost of £23 billion. And the budget deficit has decreased from 12.3% to be 8.2%, and the inflation reduced from 14.5% to 9.2%. And the unemployment rate has reached 7.5%, which is the least after it was 12.7%, and the hard currency reserve reached 45.5 billion US dollars. GDP is growing by 6.6%. The reform plan made the Egyptian economy stronger, more flexible and resilient in facing crises like the Russian plane incident. that influenced the tourism sector, and because of it we lost billions, and even the pandemic COVID-19 did not stop production in Egypt. And we were able to face the pandemic. The Russian-Ukrainian war caused a big crisis, and the losses are about $2.8 trillion worldwide, and we were able to provide all the strategic commodities, and we supported the private sector. We focused on domesticating industry and encouraging entrepreneurship, a long journey. And the hero is the nation that is never stopped by any crisis and will keep constructing and building. And with his hands, Egypt will always be the mother of the world. And now the speech of the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Melbouli. In the name of Allah, Your Excellency President El-Sisi, the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, ladies and gentlemen, let me from the heart of the new administrative capital to be here with you today at the beginning of the opening session of the Economic Conference Egypt 2022 under the title A Roadmap for a More Competitive Economy. This conference comes in light of an international crisis not witnessed by the whole world since World War II. And if you see the developments every day, you recognize that all governments of the developed countries and even the emerging countries are struggling to survive and secure the stability of these countries. Egypt is not far from that, and Egypt is classified by all international institutions as one of the countries that was most influenced by this big crisis. And the political leadership realizes the importance of putting together a road map for the future of the Egyptian economy, in which not only the government would participate, but all experts, specialists, businessmen, political parties. The President designated the government to hold this conference to discuss the future of the Egyptian economy and to come up with a clear roadmap for this economy in the future. And this roadmap should include two parts. One, for recovery from the short-term crisis, which is the international crisis, along with some solutions to some of the chronic problems we have. And of course, they will need long-term and short-term solutions. We as the government, since the beginning of the crisis and even before it, we're following up everything that is written about Egypt abroad or in Egypt, and we check the social media and listen to the opinions of Egyptians, and we see what the experts say in the talk shows. And let me be honest and say that sometimes we find that some of those opinions are not based on real knowledge of the Egyptian economy, and they do not know the real figures. And we started saying that Egypt is going through the worst crisis, and we feel that there are a lot of concerns from our citizens. So I said, along with the government, that this opening session to be able to move towards a roadmap for the future, it is so important to know the reality of our economy, to know where we were in the past and where do we stand now, so that when we develop solutions for the problem, they would be based on information we all know and challenges we all would agree upon. Thus, we found that the best thing to know where were we and where are we now is to look at the Egyptian economy over the past 40 years. And when we get back 40 years back, and we found that this economic conference is the fourth economic conference held over the past 4 years. And I said here that we need to make use of all the outcomes of these 4 conferences to know what happened to the Egyptian economy, so that when we come today to come up with the recommendations from this conference, it would be something realistic. So let me, in the first part of the presentation, analyze the outcomes of 2 important conferences. The first was called the Big Economic Conference. It was held in 1982. And the second is Egypt Future, held in 2005. Why do we select those 2 in particular? Because each one of them came when Egypt was in exceptional conditions. That of 1982, Egypt has just came out from the victory of 1973, and the state was coming up with an economy overloaded by a lot of difficulties. And there was the policy of economic openness and economic liberalization, and there was the assassination of late President Sadat, and President Mubarak assumed office. And in 2015, we were just coming up from a lot of political difficulties and crises in 2011, 2013, and afterwards there was terrorism, and there was the invitation from President El-Sisi for this conference to discuss the conditions of the economic development. So in the first part, we will analyze how was Egypt at the times of these conferences and what were the outcomes of them. I know that Egypt is a young country. More than 60% of its population is below the age of 40. So the photos before you may not have been seen by a lot of people who are here with us, and maybe the older people can remember these photos. These photos were taken from the archive of Al-Ahram newspaper between the years 1987 and 1982, when there were long queues looking for the diesel cylinders, and how the hospitals looked like back then. Students in universities, citizens standing in queues looking for any good or commodity. And of course, a lot of us have seen the movies made at that time, and they were all making laugh of the queues that people would make to buy products, even if it is a soap. And this is another photo that shows the railways in Egypt. And the Egyptians always use comics to criticize the developments and to express lack of credibility. So here there is a caricature where the funeral is carrying a telephone to show that they are not confident that the problem of the telephones would be solved. There was the problem of sanitation in all suburbs. And this is how the schools and the classrooms looked like at that time. This made the late president to hold a big economic conference to discuss the Egyptian economy. This conference was attended by 40 economists and experts. These are some photos of these individuals who were at that time there and participated as economic experts in this conference. The history before you shows that it was held from the 12th to the 14th of February 1982. And the main title was Experts Putting a Subscription for the Egyptian Economy. They wanted to discuss the current status of the problem and how to correct the economic path and put a strategy for development. And this conference has a lot of very important documents that express the details of the Egyptian economy and put proposals. And we received a copy of these proposals. And we found that they found that there are 10 main challenges facing Egypt and the Egyptian economy. We'll go through them. And let's see what are still there up till now. The first one was overpopulation, and the title was that overpopulation with the current rate, I'm talking about 1982, will eat up all the development projects, and we cannot improve the standard of living without family planning. At that time, the Egyptians were 44 million, and now after 14 years, we are 104 million population. The problem of housing was the second problem. And the title was the need to build 8.2 housing units over 20 years, and that the state should provide 500,000 housing units over 20 years to solve this problem. And I don't know whether you can read the main sentence or not. It says providing a decent house and prevent the appearance of steel units. Another challenge was the subsidy, rationalizing subsidy, the exchange rate, and use of hard currency at the time when the subsidy at that time was only 1.5 billion. Dealing with the budget deficit, there was a budget deficit, and if you would read, the recommendations are targeting financial reform and provide hard currency. And at that time, because it is always said that we're worried about the public debt to the GDP at that time was above 100%. I know that you are economists, but I am explaining to the Egyptian citizen that the GDP is the total of what is produced by the economy in a year. So the public debt was bigger than the GDP, the whole economy. Can we manufacture for exportation? At that time, the deficit of the payment balance was 2.5 billion, and they were saying that we need to support industry, and the industry sector to the GDP is low and should be raised. Changing the consumption pattern. At that time, there was a policy to attract investment so that the private sector would be part of production sectors. But due to the conditions back then, this led to more consumption. So they focused on importing luxurious products without focusing on the production sectors. So the danger referred to by the conference is that the consumption has increased threefold by an annual increase of 20%. The inflation and the volume of inflation reached 20% in 1981. The need to create job opportunities. At that time, the needed job opportunities annually were 400,000. And now you know that what is needed is 1 million annually for the youth who go into the labor market. So at that time they said that the dream was that all investments, the investments of the private sector with the public sector would create 400,000 job opportunities to reach 6 billion Egyptian pounds. That was the target of that conference. The public sector and the role of the private sector at that time. The public sector work has 320 companies suffering from a lot of problems, and the private sector's role should be greater. The conference came up with a lot of recommendations, and they were all good ideas. Yet after only 18 days from the end of the conference, Naguib Mahfouz, the Nobel laureate, wrote an article in the newspaper under the title "Who Did It?" And he said that the ideas emanating from the conference were not new. And I'm not saying that to underestimate the conference, as it has diagnosed the disease and suggested different solutions. And I'm asking, since we know the disease, why was it left without any treatment? And here, if we think about this, he's saying that maybe we know what are the problems, what are the diseases, and we can suggest the treatment and the solution. But the biggest challenge is our ability to implement it. So does the state have the ability and the will to do it or not? And here he was implicitly criticizing the previous conditions. So we wanted to take the same saying and see the state according to the outcomes of the conference of 1982. How did the successive governments since 1982 up till 2011 try to solve these deficits and defects? And we selected 10 main indicators. And while presenting them on the slide, you will show on the left side the conference of 1982, what did it say, and the outcome after 30 years regarding this challenge or this indicator. The conference said that the challenge of the Egyptian economy is based on imbalance between overpopulation and economic returns and revenues. Our problem after 30 years is that instead of being 44 million Egyptians, we became 81 million Egyptians. We have increased 38 million. The GDP does not meet the increasing needs of the citizens, so we need to prioritize the expenditures and increase production rates. Our production and economy should grow at higher rates to keep pace with the increase of population, but due to the conditions in Egypt and not providing enough investments to develop our economy, the result was that the average growth of GDP over 20 years was 4.4%. In some years there has been increase where it reached 7%, but if we would look over 20 years, then the average is 4.4%. When I come to compare to other similar countries, the middle income countries, will find that in the same period the growth rate they had was 5%. So Egypt was less than those countries. Another important point mentioned by the conference, meeting the basic needs of the citizen is the optimum of development. Any project to be implemented, its objective should be meeting the basic needs of the citizen. And the progress of any community is measured economically and socially through the ability to meet these needs. So long as the citizen cannot find service, wastewater, water, electricity services, then this is not an advanced community. The problem today again is due to the weak investments at that period The per capita share was about $1,360 over 20 years, but in other similar countries it was 1,800. The conference talked about creating job opportunities to assimilate the new people in the labor market. The state, with all its institutions and the number of population and the need to have 500,000 new job opportunities every year, we were not able to achieve this due to the conditions in Egypt. So the average unemployment rate was 10% almost, at the time when similar countries had an average employment rate of 4.9%. We looked at the volume of investment spent by the state in 2011 and compared it to 2021 in dollars. And we compared with a number of similar countries to Egypt to know what was the conditions of Egypt. In 1992, it was 8.9%. The total investments in 2011, it was $40 billion. When we look at similar countries, be it Turkey, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Venezuela, Argentina, South Africa, we're so far from these countries. Due to that, what we have seen in 1982 was still there up till 2011. The same problems with wastewater sanitation that covers only 45% and in the villages 12% only. The problem of traffic, electricity outage, bread problems, energy problems, unsafe areas and slums. And the real problem that we've seen, especially in the industrial sector, is that for a long period, the investments in this sector, with the exception of the last few years before 2011, were not more than 6 billion annually. While there has been a real stride in the last years before 2011, when the private sector started to participate in industry with the state. But generally speaking, the industrial sector's share was 10% only during that period. The conference of 1982 talked about the aggravation of the problem of housing, because of the fact that popular housing did not take its share from attention. So the state had adopted a number of projects for national housing and constructing big projects, but the produced housing was not enough. Accordingly, the problem of unsafe areas and slums and unplanned areas increased. So unfortunately, we had 50 or 60% of our cities unsafe areas or unplanned areas. And there was the encroachment of agricultural lands. And because of that, we lost tens of thousands of fiddans of agricultural lands. And the conference in 1982 said that the national productivity of agriculture won't be able to meet the needs, and we need a reclamation program of 150,000 fiddans annually. The state tried to do it, but all what it did was 77.8 thousand fiddans, while we should have targeted 150,000. Increase in illiteracy rates, and this was due to the fact that spending on education was not enough, and the quality of education was facing a problem due to the pressure on economy. The health services, and let me here read the WHO report that says that Egypt has the highest level of hepatitis C infections, and this was written at the beginning of 2015. And it said that Egypt has the highest level of hepatitis C worldwide, and 14.7% of the Egyptians are virus carriers, and there are 17,000 new cases every year. The debt, and we hear a lot about the volume of the debt and how it is related to the GDP. Over 30 years, since 1982 up till 2011, 19 years of them, the volume of debt was more than 100% of the GDP. And here I'm talking about the debt of the public balance institutions only. In 19 years, out of these 30 years, it was more than 100%. And despite the efforts that were exerted, because there were in fact a lot of efforts made to solve the problem of the state, yet the conditions of the state made it at that time adopt medium solutions to deal with the problems on the short term. It reduced the investment expenses and focused on consumption expenses. Most of the budget went to covering salaries, pensions, subsidy, and the investment expenses was very low, as you can see. And the weak production ability of the industry, as well as the inability to provide the needed job opportunities. This was the case up till 2011. And I here would like to look at point one. We, as Egypt at that time, had to use the sedatives as solutions. In order to be just to that period, the community did not accept some difficult solutions, and would like to remember of what the state tried to do in 1977 to restructure the subsidy and what was the reaction of the citizens. So the state was always worried about its stability and its security. Was this enough to survive or construct a state? Let me read together what was mentioned by Gamal Hamdan, the great thinker. The real crisis is that Egypt, in the face of crisis, does not take the radical solution ever, but it takes the moderate solution, the sedatives, and this leads to the aggravation of the crisis even more. Why the state was not taking radical solutions? Because it was known that these solutions sometimes won't be accepted by the people, and it would have a political cost. So the governments cannot bear that. And that's why they want to achieve the security and the stability of the country. But on the long term, this does not produce an advanced country. What happens is that we use the sedatives, and this does not solve the problems radically. Excuse me. This was the first edition in 1976. We all, the Egyptians, need to understand when this was said. It was said even before the war. And it was during the Yemen crisis. So I wish you would look at this and realize when this was said. And then came the political disturbances and the revolutions of 2011-2013, and the Egyptian economy was affected in an unprecedented manner. And I here would take quotes from what was mentioned by the World Bank and IMF in 2015, and I wish you would read them. They said back then, Egypt has been through radical changes. The events that happened in January 2011 had witnessed a long list of promises and a lot of challenges. And in 2015, Egypt has suffered for a number of years from increase of unemployment rates as well as weak economic growth due to the increasing public deficit as well as the fragility due to the lack of foreign reserve. Let's look at these figures as realities. The Egyptian losses due to the political instability and the terrorist attacks in Egypt, these losses are 477 billion US dollars. The reserve lost 20.3 since 2011 up till 2013. The losses of tourism sector 32%. The average unemployment rate reached 13%. And these are some of the figures that show how our indicators and figures reduced due to these exceptional conditions in Egypt, be it increase in budget deficit or the GDP that reduced to 2.2%, the per capita share of GDP decreased, the reserves, all these problems witnessed by the Egyptian economy, and I think that we have all witnessed this as it is a recent period. But Egypt, since February 2011 up till May 2013, our rating has reduced 6 times in 28 months. So in general, the state faced a catastrophic condition, and there was 13% budget deficit, 516 billion Egyptian pounds increase in debt, and shrinkage of investment expenses to be only 7%. These conditions, if they have went, it would have led to a lot of dangers. So the state responded to these challenges in 2015, and the state in 2015 had 2 options: either to follow the policy of moderate solutions, use sedatives, and this is something that could have been understood in light of the disturbances and the troubles back then. How to talk about the restructuring of subsidy and economic reforms to solve problems that lasted for 50 years. Anyone could have said that it's much easier to take this solution even on a temporary basis. But the other option for the state was the one mentioned by thinker Gamal Hamdan. It is to find radical solutions to problems that lasted for 40 or 50 years in Egypt. Of course, this has a political cost, economic cost. But the objective is, where do we want Egypt to be in the future? Here came the conference of 2015, and this conference was under the title Egypt the Future. And this conference has put 3 elements: the macroeconomic stability, national projects, improving the investment environment. And I will review in brief what did we do. The state, since 2015 and in 2016, started the economic reform program at a very difficult moment. The state took the decision, and since then the Egyptian economy started witnessing higher growth rates. And during that period, we witnessed the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, and it lasted for 2 years and then started the Ukrainian-Russian crisis. Despite that, over the past fiscal year, June 2022, the Egyptian economy growth rate was 6.6%, and the average for all these years is 5.3%, in comparison to 4.4% over the past 30 years, and 3% from 2011 till 2015. The World Bank, despite all the challenges in this month's report, said that Egypt is expected to achieve a growth rate of 4.8% in 2022-2023, as the highest one in the Middle East and North Africa economies. And despite the increase of population that lasted since 2011 up till 2021, we've increased by 21 million, which is equal to the number of births in 6 European countries. The per capita share of GDP increased from $2,700 to be $4,000 in 2021. The World Bank did a very important study, what if? And it said, if Egypt has witnessed lower fertility rates, and this was during the 2000s. The fertility rate was 3.5% per woman, and it decreased, and it was expected that if things would go on, then we will have only 2 children during that period. But with 2011 and the conditions, the curve has increased again, and now it is 2.8% the fertility rate. There was a comparison done in this study showing that if the population of Egypt stopped at 92 instead of 102 in 2020, then there would have been a great increase in the level of economy, savings, increase of per capita share of GDP, and every year we would have 570 billion Egyptian pounds. IMF said that despite all these challenges, expected that the per capita share of GDP in Egypt would reach $4,800 by 2025 with the projects implemented. We achieved the highest employment rate over the past 30 years, and as a state, we reduced the unemployment rate to be the least. Despite the increase in the manpower. In 2013, we started with unemployment rate 13% when the manpower was 23 million. In 2021, we reached unemployment rate 7.2%, and the manpower is 30 million. So we achieved double effort. We reduced the unemployment rate and assimilated the increase in the labor market during that period. And we compared our rates to other similar countries. You can compare 2011 to 2021. Most of the countries has an increase in unemployment rate due to the world crisis, but Egypt was able to reduce it. And the IMF has put expectations that Egypt would reach less than 7% over the coming 5 years to reach 6.7% unemployment rate. The food security project and its ability to achieve stability and to give momentum to the Egyptian economy that helped us reduce the inflation. And we saw together how the supply crisis started and increase of inflation in the second half of 2021, yet our inflation was less than 10% till mid-2022. And we have a very important point here. Through the agricultural reclamation projects, we were able to add 250,000 new fiddans that were planted with wheat, so that We had 3.5 million fidans planted with wheat this year. And through the silos project, we were able to have a reserve of our local wheat. And that's why up till this moment, thank God, we have reserves. And the Minister of Supply was talking about 5 months. Major projects implemented by the state, be it the new Delta East Uwainat Toshka project with the objective of adding the agricultural lands to improve our figures in economy and to reduce the budget deficit, and the bill of importing grains and wheat. Our debt as a state, we reached 103% and 100% in 2016 and 2017, and we started to reach before COVID-19 80 or 81%, and it was expected that in 2 years it would be less than 75% to be like any stable country that does not have a problem of debt. But due to COVID-19, and we were insisting on protecting our economy, so the debt has increased a bit, and with the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, it increased again, and despite that, we have our plan to get back to declining the budget. And here, we are far from the 100% debt rate to the GDP. We are talking about 80s or 90% this year. And our plan is to reduce this debt over the coming 5 years. The external debt, and this is a very important point because a lot of people are talking about it. I would like to say that we brought this curve showing the external debt to the GDP since the beginning of the 80s. At the beginning of the 90s, the external debt was 150% of the GDP. At that time, in 1991, there was an agreement made with the Paris Club, and a number of Arab countries reduced the volume of the external debt, and they have written off $300 billion. They were not write off in 1 year, but it was done through a certain schedule. And part of it is the debt exchange that we are doing with a number of European countries. Let's look at the figure. We had 150% external debt to the GDP. And it was reduced afterwards, and the state kept it. And the last figure was 34.5% according to the last month. But let us admit that this is a challenge. It is not just the ratio of the external debt to the GDP, but it's the external debt of experts, as we are above the safe level, and also the debt service to experts where we exceed the safe levels. So it is our role as the state, along with businessmen and the private sector, to work on going back to the safe levels. The other important point we want to review and compare, and we selected 4 countries similar to our countries because they are developing countries, to look at the volume of the external debt to their economies. We found that in all experiences, the emerging countries use funding through debts at a certain moment to pump investments and achieve the development. And with the stability of the economy, it's able to pay the debt service and the interest rate. China did so, but we do not want to compare ourselves to China. We have looked at countries like Turkey, Vietnam, Brazil, India. These are the figures before you, their total debts in comparison to Egypt. And we also have a perception as Egyptians that the exchange rate is related to the strength of the economy. So when the Egyptian pound is lower in comparison to the dollar, it means that our economy is weak. But on the contrary, we find that sometimes this is a planned procedure to strengthen the economy, the exports, and to attract investments. So as Egypt, we are still like similar countries regarding the exchange rate. So the economic experts always say that the problem is not the exchange rate, but it is curbing the inflation rate, because this means the price of the commodities. So it is so important to curb the inflation rate rather than thinking of the exchange rate. On the contrary, some countries might take steps to make them more competitive by weakening their currency. Despite the volume of debt, we have a very important indicator that our external debt, 73% of it is mid-term or long-term debt. Despite everything, we have achieved a very important indicator. Over 5 successive years, Egypt has a preliminary surplus in its budget. When we put aside the debt service, our revenues are more than our expenses. If you put aside the debt service, Egypt's revenues are more, and we can use it to reduce our debt. That's why our agreement with the IMF focuses on achieving this primary surplus. We were one of the few countries, despite these crises, were able to do it. So despite all these crises, the Egyptian economy was able to restore its stability. But of course, with the big world challenges, there are other challenges we need to face. And we have seen this through different indicators. In order not to speak theoretically, what did the financial institutions say about Egypt in 2011 and 2022? I have quotes from different institutions, the rating institutions, Moody's and Fitch. What did they say about the economy in 2011 and what do they say in 2022? And Standard and Board 2 days ago kept Egypt's rating as is and said that the ability of the Egyptian economy reflected the response to the external economic pressures, and IMF expected that the growth rate would be 5.9% this fiscal year. The second element, the national projects, and sorry for being lengthy, but it is so important for us all to be aware of how our economy looks like. The national project, because a large and important part of what is written is why did we have all these national projects? Was it a must for the state to implement all these national projects? By doing so, you have taken a lot of debts. Let us mention something in the literature of economy. It says that in any political or economic crisis, the nature of the private sector is that it does not want to increase its investments. So, any state that faces an economic or political crisis, the government should intervene directly to support the economic activities and reduce the economic shocks and their impacts on companies and individuals. This is the literature. Egypt has targeted with its investments not only salaries and subsidy, but for the first time, the state is supporting in public investments. And more than half of these investments were targeted to transport, education, health, and infrastructure. The country was in need for infrastructure. So we need to have investment funding. The private sector couldn't have done that, and even in normal conditions, it is not the role of the private sector to work strongly on infrastructure. This is always the role of the state, and sometimes with the participation of the private sector. Yet, the state implemented the major national project that exceeded £7 trillion, and more than 90% of these investments were implemented by the private sector. So here the private sector benefited. It did not have the ability to fund projects, so the state, through the public investments, made the private sector operate. And here we're talking about tens of thousands of companies from the private sector that provided millions of workers. And we are saying now that the private sector is 78% of the manpower. So if the state did not have invest, then we will see how the Egyptian economy would have looked like. At that time, in 2015, we announced major national projects. And here I will speak about the will of the state to implement its promises. In 2015, Egypt had a deficit of 6,000 megawatts of electricity. At that time, we started implementing a number of projects. At the beginning of 2022, Egypt have surplus of 13,000 megawatts. Some would say, why do you have this surplus? If you want to build a country for the coming 20 years and to tell any investment, come establish a project here for 20 years, you need to have a surplus if we're really constructing a state. We moved from electricity capacity of 28,000 megas to 59,000 megas, so we're talking about 110% increase in electricity capacities. At that time, we signed the project for a solar farm, and the project is implemented now. Bin Ban farm, the fourth biggest solar farm worldwide, and when the new phases would be introduced, it would be ranked the second or the third. In 2015, we signed agreements with a number of companies to excavate electricity, like British Petroleum, INI. And with the strong will of the state, we succeeded in excavating Zohr. And for it to come into service, it was expected to be 4 or 5 years, but the political leadership insisted on getting it into service as quickly as possible, so we pumped more investments. This project could have come into service by 2021. So the state would have kept importing natural gas, but due to increasing the investments, we now are ranked 5th on the regional level for oil and natural gas production. Excuse me, Dr. Mustafa, would you please get back to this slide? Here I would like to make a very important point. This would have never been done unless we have decided the borders with Cyprus and Greece on the Mediterranean Sea and with Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea. No companies would have gone to excavate for gas unless we do these borders. Secondly, it's not just a matter of the idea or the ability, but it's God's gift. If we did not have this well now, then Egypt would have been in darkness, because we do not have enough money to pay $2 million per month for purchasing natural gas to operate the electricity stations. So we would have been in need to pay 10 billion Egyptian pounds to purchase natural gas. From where would we have brought the 10 billion? It means $120 billion annually. So you need to know that God is supporting us. Some people, when they say it, they say, is everything done by God? Yes. Because when we came to draw the borders, we were criticized. Why are you going to do it? And when we found this well, Ini took it for 5 years. I said 18 months and not 5 months. They said, how we'll do it? I told them, I will be there to solve any problem for you inside the Egyptian borders. And the land that was allocated for such a project, for a refinery project, was allocated in only 2 hours. And they wanted to have 10,000 for this land in Port Said. The dredging machines went there to develop the platform on which they put the refinery. While Dr. Mustafa is saying, he is just saying headlines, but under every headline there is a story for all Egyptians. I would like to tell you that 25,000 working hours were done by the state and myself. 25,000 working hours, 7 years, 30 days per month, 10 hours a day. So this was done by the support of God. And I swear, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do it. Egypt's petroleum exports in 1 year jumped by 109%. Last year we have, for the first time in our history, exports of $18 billion. Here I'm talking about the petroleum industries and the petrochemical industries. In comparison to the previous year, it was 8.6%. At that time, there was the dream of the new administrative capital in which we are today. In 2015, we have seen just a master plan, and now you can take a tour and see what was done in the new administrative capital. And we were discussing the idea of establishing smart, environment-friendly means of transportation. And now you have these projects, the LTD, the monorail. Besides these signed projects, what did the state do? We had the important intervention mentioned by the Conference of 1982, the problem of unsafe areas, slum areas, and lack of low-income housing. The state started working on the transport network, and we are reading everything that is written for roads, bridges, and means of transportation. I wanted just to look at a report from the World Bank launched in 2014. It said that Egypt's losses in Greater Cairo annually due to the traffic is $8 billion, and expected that if the same conditions would be there, then the losses in 2030 would be $18 billion. This would have been the losses of Egypt due to the continuation of traffic in Greater Cairo only. So we had the necessity of intervening, because if I'm going to lose 8 billion annually, even if we are not going to reach 18, then I'm talking about $80 billion. I'm not going to talk about the 18. We'll talk about $8 billion would have been the losses of Egypt because of traffic. And let me also repeat again the study of JICA conducted in 2009 that said that Cairo would become a big parking space in 2020 if there is no system to establish new roads that serve Greater Cairo. We constructed a network not only for Greater Cairo, but we constructed 7,000 kilometers of roads in addition to constructing 10,000 other kilometers. So we're talking about a total 17,000 kilometers. This was how Cairo looked like in 2015, and now 2022, El Munib corridor, after constructing it. You can see now how the traffic is smoother in the ring road. It is so difficult for any state, and it's more costly to repair something that needs repairing. It's much easier to construct something new. So the challenge of expanding a road in the middle of houses made us pay billions to compensate the people in order to deal with this problem, and the cost is $8 billion annually. We did not stop at Greater Cairo. We are working in all Egyptian governorates, constructing new roads. We are constructing a country. Not just roads, we are talking about collective means of transportation. We are about to host COP27, and the whole world is talking about green, modern means of transportation, and Egypt is not less than any other country. So we are investing in establishing a network that would serve us for the coming 30 years. Once more, we are not talking about sedatives. We need to solve the problem for the coming generations. Egypt's indicators regarding infrastructure and the roads network. I will stop at the year 2014. In blue, this was our ranking infrastructure. We were the 125th, and in roads, we were the 118th. Now, we are 52 in infrastructure, 28 in roads. This is so important to know the volume of effort done, so that again we can put Egypt amongst the countries we deserve to be among. We had a problem of urbanization and housing, and all cities that were constructed in Egypt up till 2015 were 24. And excuse me, the President, I would like to invite Dr. Hanafi Gbali to get back to the minutes of the Parliament in 1987, when the Minister of Housing, Hasaballah Kafrawi, stood in the Parliament defending the idea of constructing cities, Sadat, the 10th of Ramadan, Sheikh Zayed, 6th of Ramadan, Shuruq al-Ubur, Burj al-Arab, the time when we were telling him, why do we need these cities? There is no need to spend on these cities. At that time, he defended by saying that we cannot stay on this limited area, and it's much better to give the opportunity to the future generations to live in new planned cities. So we can imagine if the state at that time, during the criticism, did not construct these cities. Now these cities are assimilating more than 12 million population, and it has all the industries in Egypt. So where would these 12 million have lived? They would have lived on agricultural lands or in other unsafe areas and slums. Was this enough for the state? Of course not. Because the state, with the overpopulation, since 2015 up till this moment, the state constructed more than 1 million housing units. We are constructing 30 new cities, the smart cities or the fourth generation cities. For unsafe areas and slums, we have put investments of 425 billion pounds to put an end to unsafe areas that used to appear in all movies and TV series, and it was a stigma for Egypt. I will show you the image from the last area, Sur Magra al-Uyun, how it is established now. In every area in Egypt, we had these unsafe areas. All these photos are from the past now, and they are replaced by these buildings. And in addition to that, Egypt implemented one of the biggest housing projects for low-income and middle-income segments. The biggest photo is from the low-income areas, and these are all part of the 30 cities that are under construction now. And let's see how these cities look like. This is Al-Alamein in 2017. And this was the dream, and now this is the reality of Al-Alamein. Al-Mansoura 2018, and this is how Al-Mansoura looks like now. And on the left side you can find Mansoura University, Al-Jalala City, Al-Jalala University. Egypt has made a great urban stride that made us this year take 5 awards for different projects in different fields. The whole world is saying what Egypt is doing is an urban miracle. Some people criticize us by saying that you have focused only on concrete, but we are focusing on the human being as well. And in the investments in the education sector, we can see the number of classrooms that were constructed up till 2014. They used to be 5,000. And last year we have constructed 21,000 classrooms. And of course we are constructing new schools, but they will tell us there are accidents that happen in the existing schools. We have 56,000 schools. Some of them need renovation, maintenance, and we are talking about a very big system. As a result of overpopulation, every year we need 20,000 or 25,000 new classrooms to be constructed in addition to the maintenance of the existing ones. And we still have challenges, and we are working on them as our plan. In 2015, we had 23 public universities, 26 private universities. We've added to them 39 new universities, be it public, private, or technological or national. The world rates say that for every 1 million, we need to have 1 university. Now we are talking about 88 universities. So we are closer to the world rate. And these constructed universities would take students for the coming 20 years. Healthcare. Of course, we have increased the investment in health. And this is how Sohag University looked like in 2015 and when it was rebuilt on the lower photo, and there is Abu Teeg Hospital. Some people are complaining from the renovation of a number of universities, and we are working to turn all our hospitals into the photos on the left side. And with the big initiatives adopted by the state, the 100 Million Lives Initiative, Women's Health Initiative, Fighting Stunting and Obesity for Children campaign, Renal Failure campaign, made World Health Organization, the same organization that says that Egypt has the highest rate of hepatitis C worldwide, says that the national campaign for ending hepatitis C in Egypt is an achievement, and the 100 million lives is considered to be a role model annually regarding confronting and targeting diseases. Despite that, social protection is taking place strongly. This year, 2022-2023, 239 billion are allocated for takaful and karama and for social protection. We had a problem with bread up till 2015, but thank God now in only 7 years I do not have a problem with bread, and there is the digital system and the ration card for all citizens. This is how the cylinders looked like in 2015, and now with the expansion in natural gas, we have cylinder warehouses. All this, of course, has a great financial cost incurred by the state. Yet we need to get back to meeting the basic needs. The progress of countries is measured by meeting the basic needs of the citizens. Takaful and Karama is reaching out to 250,000 families. The last project is Decent Life Project, and you all know it. All the villages in Egypt were neglected for tens of years, and every citizen and villager had a dream to know about a wastewater project in his village, or to find potable water. We are talking about a project with an estimate of 700 billion, but we'll exceed this figure. But we need to spend on this project because we're talking about 60 million Egyptians who will enjoy a decent life. With all the implemented projects on the ground, and these are the photos. These are all buildings on the ground. The implementation of these projects is very high, as there were a lot of comics made about lack of credibility in the state, and that it does not implement projects according to schedule. Now there are comics about the volume of projects implemented by the state and how fast they are being implemented. And we follow up this, and sometimes they want to raise doubts about what is being implemented by the state. And 2 days ago, we have seen a comic about a bridge, and through a Photoshop they said that this is how the bridge looks like, and they said that the bridge is pregnant, and they laughed at this project, while the real photo is this one on the left side. So here the idea is that I'm talking to the youth. You need to be aware that raising doubts about what the state is doing through jokes make people start asking, did they really do such a bridge? So it is so important that we as Egyptians, instead of complaining from slow performance, we are complaining now about quick performance. We wanted to do a study saying if the state did not spend on the national projects these investments since 2015 up till now, and we have used the sedatives, what would the Egyptian economy look like? I will show you this slide. And we worked on this slide with a lot of experts. We put a scenario for the inflation, the shocks, the currency rates, the world crises, and we looked at the reality. The reality is shown in green when we pumped the investments, how the growth rate looked like, and what would have been the case if we did not implement these projects. Whether these, regardless of whether it provided services to people or not. What would have the Egyptian economy looked like? It would have looked like the line in red. then our growth rate would have been negative, because we could have suffered from the repercussions of the economic reform and then the pandemic and then the Russian crisis. So the Egyptian economy growth rate would have been negative, while we grow 2 million annually. So the unemployment would have been 15.4%. So we can imagine what would have the Egyptian economy been like. Now we have unemployment rate of 7.2%. It could have been 15% if we did not implement these national projects. The last field is improving the investment environment. And let me tell you that this is one of the most difficult challenges facing any country, because here we're not talking about projects to be implemented on the ground only, but we're talking about culture and environment of red tape, routine work. And this is the most difficult thing for a country to do reform. We worked on 4 elements here. The first is the legislative framework. And IMF in 2015 said that Egypt needs to do structural reforms. And we did 10 projects to support the investment environment. 6 were issued and 4 are finalized, and the Parliament will discuss them in the near future. They are all working on the automation of procedures, facilitating the procedures. Egypt was always being criticized for not respecting intellectual property rights. And the international companies were worried of coming to Egypt for fear of stealing their ideas. So Egypt launched a strategy this year, and all institutions said now that Egypt took a step in this direction. The OECD up till 2020 was talking about our problem with bureaucracy, red tape, settling disputes. And the state over the last year take a lot of steps to enforce the dispute settlement unit in the cabinet, as well as expanding the investment opportunities map and the investors service offices. We still have a long way to go, and we admit this, but there are steps that are taking. We simplified the procedures. The World Bank said that Egypt is one of the countries that need 173 days for licensing, and we as the cabinet made the decision that the license should be issued in 20 working days. And we have the golden license to automate the tax procedures and remote the dispute settlement, as well as cooperating with the economic courts. Things need time, of course, and it takes years, but at least we have put the steps to implement it. This point was always raised, the quality of land management system, especially for the industrial lands, and they used always to say that Egypt has a problem with land pricing for industrial investments. I would like to stop at this point. According to the directives of the President, we used to talk to the investors and businessmen, and I would like to show you the figures. We saw, has the state not allocated lands for industry, and we found that the state over the previous years allocated 30 million meters square for industrial activities. Some of them were able for free in Upper Egypt, and there are lands everywhere. And we looked at the lands that were developed. We found that after allocating these lands, those that are under service are 3 million meters, which is 10% only. And then when I discussed with the businessmen, telling them we have 27 million meters square that are not developed yet. We received a number of complaints that there are no enough utilities, or the method of offering them makes the brokers take the lands and we as industrialists cannot get them. And they said that you overprice lands and let these lands be for usufruct. So we made a decision that it would be through usufruct or ownership, and that the Industrial Development Authority would issue all the license, even the operation license, on behalf of the investor. And some of them said, I want to expand in my existing factory and there is a plot of land nearby, let me take it. Or someone has a new project in green energy or green hydrogen and would pump investments. So we developed a central mechanism for allocating the lands for such types of projects, expansion projects or strategic projects. And we made a decision to price all lands, and this is published, and all industrial lands in Egypt are priced in Egyptian pounds, so that any investor, if he wants to take any plot of land in Egypt, he will know its price. There is a package of investment incentives we launched during the last year for the investment incentives, the strategy for manufacturing automotives, additional non-tax incentives, the exemption of the 19 industrial sector from the real estate tax for 3 years to enhance competitiveness and open new fields. Let's be transparent. We have complaints that there is no neutral competitiveness, and the private sector wants a clear vision from the state towards its role in economy. That's why we developed the state ownership document, and this document would identify the role of the state and the presence of the state in the different sectors, and we will support competitiveness, and we will have competitiveness protection and the competitiveness impartiality. And the state ownership document will be discussed tomorrow in the first morning session. The state worked also on developing the infrastructure, the investment zones, the free zones, the industrial zones, to make this available for the private sector. And the state started a new important methodology, which is building ourselves, because we found that the small and medium enterprises cannot construct themselves. So we established 17 industrial clusters with a cost of 10.2 billion pounds to construct small enterprises, small factories. And that's why OECD said that the state in the past focused on a number of reforms. And thank God that during the last year, according to the central bank, for the first time, the foreign direct investment is about 8.9 billion US dollars. And I admit that we have a problem in communicating with businessmen, although the state took all these decisions and procedures, and we announced them and held press conferences for them and talked about them in talk shows. But when we did a questionnaire with 2,500 facilities before the conference, we found that most of them are not aware of all these procedures made by the state. So there is a problem in communication, and we need to agree together on how to communicate better so that you would know all these procedures. And we have discussions, and I hope through the sessions of the conference we would discuss how can we inform the youngest investor or industrialist about these procedures. To where are we heading? Egypt in the past, especially during the last 10 years, has been through 5 economic crises. Each one of them was capable of destroying any country: 2011, 2013, 2018, COVID, and the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. But despite all that, Egypt is in a strong position that enabled it during COVID-19 to succeed in recovery, with a cost, of course, but at least we were able to get out of it. And we had a positive growth rate, although that most of the similar countries were growing negatively at that time. During the first half of 2021-2022, the growth rate was 9%, something Egypt never did. And this all was an indicator that we are recovering. Then came the Russian-Ukrainian crisis and exerted a lot of pressures on us. We had the recovery in the Egyptian exports and the revenues, and the Financial Times said that Egypt survived from world shrinkage in comparison to other countries, and that the economy is capable of resilience. But the biggest challenge that the whole is facing, Egypt is part of it. This reduced the growth rate, witnessing highest inflation rates and the exit of capitals in Egypt. About 25 billion exited it in January, in only 1 month, and increase of debt worldwide. So while developing this conference and its agenda, we wanted to see what is written about Egypt, even abroad or in Egypt, and we found that in 2 months 1,424 reports and articles were published. We read them all to know how the world speaks about us, and we did a poll with the business community, 1,600 facilities. They said that these are the problems right now: exportation difficulties, simplifying measures, increasing export opportunities, increasing local production, reopening of factories. As you can see before you, we can summarize our crisis in Egypt in 2 groups of challenges. Challenges imposed on us by international crisis, inflation, soaring prices, increase of debt, especially external debt, lack of production inputs. This is what we need to focus on to get out of the crisis on the short term. And the sessions of this conference will discuss it, but let us admit that we have still structural chronic challenges. Some of them dates back to 1982, increase of overpopulation, weak participation of the private sector, the external debt, reduction of opportunities of foreign investments in comparison to the GDP, and fluctuation in the participation of the private sector in the economic activities. For each one of them, there would be a session discussing it. We have put in the state a number of targets, and through the sessions, we wish that each official would present his vision and leave the opportunity to all experts, politicians, economists to assist us in agreeing on a clear roadmap for all these problems. We have targets we are working on: increasing experts to 100 billion, increasing tourism revenues. And we are developing a new program with IMF, different mechanisms to increase the participation of the private sector in economic activities. Launching, the President said that we need to look at the package of social protection so that the state would keep protecting those impacted by the economic burdens. So this would be one of the important points we will discuss to see how can we work on it. and how can we secure overcoming the challenges and the policies. Expanding in funding national projects through partnership with the private sector. The state believes that it did the needed infrastructure, and despite the national projects we are offering through this conference the opportunity for the private sector to participate in implementing these projects. And we will discuss this through a number of sessions, developing the capital market and the exchange market, increasing industry, providing the industry inputs. All these are procedures that would be discussed by the state during the conference. How can we empower the private sector? We have our vision, but we need to listen to you and agree on a roadmap by the end of the conference to start implementing it. Let me wrap up by saying that our objective from this conference is not to struggle about the past, but it's more important to agree on a roadmap for the Egyptian economy to be turned into plans that would contribute to the stability of our country so that it would be among the developed countries. Thank you, and sorry for being lengthy. What is the meaning of inflation? Why are we constructing these roads? Do we have a problem with wheat and we do not have a reserve? Many questions might be asked by a citizen, a relative, a friend. But is the problem the answer or the question, or who answers these questions? In fact, it's the right of everyone to ask. But it's more important to know who can give us the information without misusing it or misleading us.
صباح الخير يا دكتور إسماعيل.
Good morning, Dr. Ismail. Good morning.
آخر جزء في
The
محاضرتنا
last part of our lecture
إزاي اقتصادنا
would be
اتطور
how our economy developed after July 52 revolution up till today.
حضرتك اكيد تقصد ازاي اتدهور.
You mean how it deteriorated? No, developed.
اتطور ازاي يا دكتور؟
How did it develop while we were giving loans to UK and US and the post? No. We said that you need to forget what is published in social media. We're talking here about information, statistics and figures. Would you tell me what are the statistics? Before 1952 revolution, our economy was based on agriculture and a small number of factories owned by foreigners. But all our resources were coming from cotton. Our cotton was harvested and would go to the UK to be manufactured abroad, and they used to take it and repay afterwards. And the Egyptians were in difficult conditions back then. Miss Layla, how was it difficult? The photos we see show clean streets. We said do not get your historical information from photos and images only. In 1937, for example, the population was 15 million. Most of them were working in agriculture. 10 million of them were poor. Illiteracy was 90%, and bilharzia infected 70%. And when the cholera came, it led to the death of thousands. And go on. So now we have constructed it from the scratch. Yes, and it was not an easy job. When we nationalized the canal, we had the tripartite aggression, and we started constructing a number of factories, and afterwards we had the defeat. Excuse me, I have a question. After the defeat, what happened to the economy? Although the defeat was very difficult, yet in fact, the state did not collapse. because we have developed a strong economy and most of our resources were going to developing and building the army until we were able to restore our land in 1973, and afterwards the liberalization wasted all that. No, we continued. This was a compensation for the people for the years. Of course, there were mistakes because it was focusing on consumption more, but it was a political necessity at that time. They tried to remove the subsidy. How was it a compensation? We might differ according to the timing, but if it would lasted, then it would have negatively influenced development. You mean bridges and roads, Yusuf? Are you going every time to say this? Why are you prevented from speaking? I'm a student exactly like yourself and have the right to speak. Would you turn it into a fight? Excuse me, didn't you finish yet, Dr. Ismail? No, doctor, I haven't finished. We'll continue tomorrow. Explain to those who do not understand and be calmer together. Why aren't you listening to us, Ismail? If you do not enjoy being with us, we can leave. Once he came back from university, he was like that. Today I had a student who was very pessimistic, and I felt then that people do not understand everything going on, and this is a student who studies economy. He deals with figures and statistics. Things are ambiguous. People do not know whether we are on the right track or not. Yes, the decision of floating the pound was wrong. The price of everything has increased. You felt that because it happened late. It should have been done 50 years ago, but people were happy. Yes, because they did not understand that this was a loss. Step by step, explain to us what you're talking about. If you would say that the real price of the dollar equals 10 Egyptian pounds and the state intervened and said no, it should be only 5 pounds, what happens then? The commodity you receive for $100 and would cost at a local price 1,000 pounds and would be sold at 500 pounds. This is very good, yes. But it would have repercussions afterwards because the exported project would be sold at a lower price than its real price, and we would consume more and import more because the exports are at a lower price. The local alternative, you won't enjoy that for a period. With the first crisis you will face, things would be difficult and the state won't find the reserve. Yes, of course, because we would be in the middle. Your local product would have lost and you do not have currency to import. And then we will have a grave crisis and an old crisis. We were all so happy because we took sedatives. What's the problem with that? Before 2011, people had it, and no, things were not fine. Otherwise, weren't people angry? Did you forget about unemployment? And hepatitis C that infected all the Egyptians and the young people who were not able to get an apartment. And that's why they had to live in unsafe areas. And 60% of the buildings were slums. And we needed schools and hospitals. Have you forgotten that all? Let's forget about the pound. What about the subsidy? We used to pay per liter diesel 3 pounds, and now it's 10 pounds because you used to give you 7 pounds from our pocket, not from your pocket, from the pocket of the state. The state's pocket is my pocket. Imagine that this state is like a family. The family receives money through the father's salary and it spends according to that, but the state does not have salaries and it brings its money from taxes. So when it spends it, it needs to know where is it going to spend it. Yes, the state has priorities. It might spend the money on infrastructure, building a hospital or a school or constructing a road, and not put diesel in your car. We pay 7 pounds for every time you pay only 3 pounds per liter. This is called subsidy. So it should go to the poor ones. Yes. I agree with you. So we are not only subsidizing the diesel of Aunt Siham's car or the water that father uses to irrigate our garden every morning. Okay. Economic reform should have been done. Otherwise, we would have faced more pain. And when we came to 2011, the reserve collapsed. So the sedative was over. Every time you tell us 2011, you started to raise your voice like your mother. There has been a change, and not only one change, 2 changes in 2011 and 2013. The economic impacts were destroying. We lost equals to the currency reserve we had about 13 times. Of course, historical events cause a problem. In addition to terrorism, our losses are not only of terrorism, but we lost billions of dollars. You forgot something, Ismail, to get up and wash your hands. We finished our meal. We came from Tajamma in October in 1 hour and a half. We took this road. It's a very good road. It used to take us a very long time, about 2 hours to come to you. This is the development we're talking about. Will you make me speak again? What do you want to say? What development? Roads and bridges only? Can't you see what's happening? Don't you see anything except roads and streets and bridges? Yes, okay, 2, 3 roads, but why all these roads? Do we need them all? Yes, and it needs even more. We are not a small country. We are 100 million population. Who constructed these roads? It's the Egyptians. So 5 million workers came back from the wars in the region. What would have they done? They started working in the construction of these projects. We were ranked 118 in the quality of roads, and now we are ranked the 28th. Very good. Then we got the World Cup in roads. He is the owner of a factory. If I want to invest in the country and I do not find the roads, what would I do? I would say I would never put my money in unsafe roads. What would be the case if an accident happened to my vehicles or my project? Yes, this is the first page in the book of economy. If you want to have investment, construct roads. through which these investments would go. We established a road network 5 times equals the road from Cairo to Alexandria, and we have dug tunnels below Suez Canal to construct Sinai. Isn't this development? Not only the roads, we have projects in the railways. Yes. The trains that used to get on fire and in accidents. We had numerous accidents. We had 11 corridors over the River Nile from Aswan till Bihira. So we are not constructing only in Cairo, but in all governorates. This is called just development and not a just development. Transport is not important for an investor. Infrastructure is equally important. Electricity, for example. This is the backbone of any factory. Imagine a factory without electricity. Could we have sat like that without any electricity outage in 2012 or 2013? The infrastructure was weak, 50 years without maintenance or upgrading, and instead of having deficit, we have now surplus. Isn't this development? Energy is so important for any investment. If any country has a strong network, anyone can invest in this country. Energy is something very important, and we have excavated natural gas fields, and instead of importing gas, we are rather exporting it now. Are you still discussing the same topic? Here is the dessert. Let us take tea in the balcony. No, we'll take our tea here. I will go out with you. Hassan? Please don't be upset with what I said. Discussions don't make me upset. Since you are optimistic, to where are we heading? Things are not at its best in the whole world and not just in Egypt. The pandemic was a big crisis, and afterwards came Russia-Ukraine war, and its cost would be even higher. But the prices have increased gravely, but they are there. Did you go to buy anything and did not find it? You have not lived the times when we used to stand in a queue to just buy a soap. Okay, but what about the poor people? We are confronting poverty now more than ever. There is Takaful and Karama program and decent life project that changed the lives of people, and the subsidy was taken to do social protection for the people who deserve the subsidy, and not those who change their cars every year. For the first time, we don't have a crisis in housing. We have social housing unit, and any employee now can pay a down payment, and we are putting an end also to unsafe slums. What about selling the assets of Egypt? No, they are not being sold there. They are offered to the private sector, and this happens in countries all over the world. Egypt now is doing its best, and it's time these assets would be given to people who can operate them. The state is creating the suitable environment for investors rather than being an investor. We have a lot of problems. We are 104 million population. The increase in population is 2.5 million annually, one of the highest worldwide. And as the president said, do you want it to be a state or not? Of course, we want it to be a state. Very well. Then with good roads, without unsafe areas or train accidents or electricity outage, without housing crisis, without people collecting subsidy and purchase Mercedes. We are moving forward towards a better future. Not for us, but for you, the coming generations. Where are you? They are leaving. Of course, he gave you a lot of figures. On the contrary, he explained to me a lot of things. Thank you all.
ما تتصوروش انتوا اسعدتوني وافدتوني قد ايه.
صباح الخير يا دكتور اسماعيل.
Good morning, Dr. Ismail. Good morning.
المستقبل مشرق يا شباب.
The future is bright.
مشرق يا يوسف. وانا مش هرتاح الا لما انتوا
I won't rest assured until you are all happy and glad and optimistic.
والتطرق أكثر إلى البيئة
And to
الاقتصادية
discuss
العالمية
the world
والتحديات
economic
الراهنة
environment and the
التي
current
تفرضها على دول
challenges
العالم أجمع.
imposed on different
يشرفنا
countries
في هذا الإطار
worldwide,
أن نستمع
we would like to
لكلمة
listen
مسجلة
to a
للدكتور
recorded
محمد
speech
العريان،
from Dr.
الخبير
Mohamed Al-Arian, the
الاقتصادي
economic
العالمي.
expert.
It is such a pleasure to be with you today. Most of the focus of this conference is going to be on the outlook for Egypt, the opportunities, the risks, and the possibility of unleashing Egypt's considerable potential. I've been asked to focus elsewhere. I've been asked to focus not on Egypt, but on the environment in which Egypt operates. Think of a house and the neighborhood. Most of the conference will focus on the house. I will focus on the neighborhood. And as we all know, neighborhoods matter for the house. Good neighborhoods can enhance the value of the house and make things much easier. Challenged neighborhoods can challenge the house. Our inconvenient reality today is that we live in a challenged neighborhood, and that is the global economy and the global financial system. Those challenges come from the developed world, from the advanced countries, and from the G7 economies in particular. And the greater the instability in the advanced countries, the more fragility in the global economy, and the more difficult it is for other countries. Let me give you a very recent example, just to give you a feel for the fluidity of the situation we're in. Again, this example has to do with advanced economies, and in particular with the G7 economy, so among the elite grouping of the advanced economies. How often does the G7 economy have the following happen to it? 1, a disorderly collapse in its currency. 2, a disorderly increase in yields. 3, a public reprimand from the IMF. 4, a warning from a rating agency. 5, emergency central bank intervention. And 6, multiple government policy U-turns that have ended up with the resignation of the Prime Minister. These 6 things happened in the G7 economy, and they happened just in the last 5 weeks. And they illustrate the inherent unthinkable instability that we have right now that comes from the advanced countries. Of course, the UK is a very special example. It was triggered, instability was triggered by a policy slippage, a fiscal slippage, the attempt to cut taxes without having compensating revenue measures. But there is sources of instability all over the advanced economy. In the United States, the Federal Reserve, the most powerful central bank in the world, is playing catch-up with inflation. It mischaracterized inflation as transitory. It fell behind in what it needed to do, and is now increasing interest rate at one of the fastest rates we have ever seen in history. Many believe that this will force the US economy into recession, and quite a few of us are concerned that that could undermine the functioning of financial markets around the world. There's also the Bank of Japan. It is having issues in a world of higher interest rates, and the same for the European Central Bank. The bottom line is that we are now living in an unusually uncertain global economy. It's not just uncertain, it is unusually uncertain. Why is this happening? Why has the neighborhood become more unstable and more fragile? Of course, there are lots of reasons for this. Here are the three that I think are among the major ones. The first has to do with the ability to grow. Many countries have lost that ability to grow because the global economy has changed characteristics. We have gone from a global economy that was lacking enough demand to a global economy that's lacking enough supply. There are supply disruptions everywhere. And as a result, there are new headwinds to economic growth. Globalization is also changing because of geopolitics, because of companies' desire to put resilience ahead of efficiency. We are seeing a different type of globalization. That is why the three major regions in the world economically, China, Europe, and the United States, they are all slowing at the same time. So the three engines of growth for the global economy are slowing at the same time. This is why the IMF also had to revise its projections earlier this month and warned us, and I quote from it, "The worst is yet to come." So the first issue we have is a growth deficit in the world economy. The second issue we have is inflation, high and persistent inflation. Now, that inflation has gone from being caused by the energy shock coming out of the Ukraine-Russia war, from the food shock also coming out of that war, to becoming something that is much more broad-based. Economists measure drivers of inflation by something called the core measures. The core measures try to take out the volatile ones, the ones that go up and down. For the United States, for Europe, and for Japan, core inflation is still going up. So we have an inflation problem which is forcing central banks into a very difficult trade-off. Do they go hard against inflation and risk crushing the economy and causing also financial instability? Or are they soft towards inflation and risk stagflation, that combination of low growth and high inflation? The central banks and the Federal Reserve in particular in the United States has opted for going hard against inflation, which has meant that the dollar has appreciated very strongly, over 20% against the other world currencies this year. And that, of course, means more imported inflations for other countries. It means more pressure on their own currency and more pressure on their own reserves. What about the third reason? The third reason has to do with financial market functioning. Think of it in the following way. The system adapted to its environment, and that environment was characterized by more than a decade of very low interest rates, zero in the United States, negative in Europe, and massive injection of liquidity by central banks. In a world like this, the financial system took on too much debt, took on too much leverage, because it assumed that this regime would continue for a long time. However, inflation has changed all this. And as a result, the financial system itself has to adjust to this changing reality. And as I said earlier, it is a reality that is changing very quickly. This is the most front-loaded interest rate hike by the Federal Reserve in many, many decades. With that comes liquidity strains in the world's biggest financial markets. With that comes massive market reactions to any policy slippage, as we saw with the United Kingdom. And with that comes the risk of a financial accident. This is a very challenging environment for the vast majority of countries in the world. The neighborhood is challenging the House. It's an environment, it's a reality that requires great care, significant resilience, and agility. Agility in reacting to all these unthinkables. These three attributes, care, resilience, and agility, are the ones you should keep in mind as we transition from the neighborhood to the house, the Egyptian economy and its implication. I started with the image of a house and a neighborhood. Let me conclude with another image, that of a very bumpy journey to a better destination. The bumpiness of this journey comes from the shocks that the global economy and global finance are being subjected to. It's an inherently bumpy journey, but it is to a better destination. That destination will be characterized with growth that is more inclusive, more sustainable in terms of climate and the environment. It will be characterized by a more genuinely stable financial system, no longer the artificial finance of central banks in the advanced countries, but genuine financial stability. And it's a world that we hope will be characterized by better global policy coordination to address common problems. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a wonderful discussion in this conference. Thank you.
The conference will discuss in a number of sessions important topics and big issues like inflation, financial and monetary policies, as well as the state ownership document, in addition to other issues. And in light of the constructive participation we received from the Secretariat of the National Dialogue, a number of questions that would be included in the sessions of this conference. And the conference collected the most prominent questions the citizens have. We would like to thank President El-Sisi for the invitation to the economic conference at this sensitive time in light of the worldwide economic changes. And we wish the best to the conference, and we hope there would be a mechanism developed to follow up the implementation of the recommendations of this conference. And would this economic conference be held regularly, for example, on an annual basis, to evaluate after the year the results and the implementation of its outcomes? In the future, we need an environment that achieves competitiveness for all types of Egyptian companies, the major, the small and medium companies, along with the different economic groups. So is a time frame for gradual exiting from the economic scene to give the opportunity to small and medium enterprises. This economic conference comes after the invitation of the President to all experts and economists to discuss the future of Egyptian economy, especially in light of the universal economic crisis. I look at the economic conference from different perspectives, the first of which is the timing, and it is very important and very suitable to holding such a conference. As for the goal, the economic conference will try to answer a number of questions, like describing inflation in Egypt, reasons for inflation, the structural reforms to be implemented for the development of the economy, in addition to the solutions and procedures to be made. I have two questions. We all wait for the negotiations with the International Monetary Fund, and will an agreement be signed with them soon? The second question, the political parties want to know more about the social protection network in light of the inflation. There should be monetary policies that would give social protection to the needy segments of the community. There is Takaful and Karama initiative. What are the economic policies that would take into consideration the human element in the Egyptian citizen? There is a time frame for the program and the economic map that would be presented by this conference, and it would be on a short term. We are part of one political system, so we want the government and the opposition to achieve our goal. Thanks and appreciation to the political leadership, President El-Sisi, for giving us the opportunity to ask a number of questions to the conference. I would like to thank the organizers of this economic conference. In light of the efforts exerted by the state to achieve economic stability, how would the state deal with some of the practices that negatively influences the exchange rate? Some of people want to focus on manufacturing, and there are international models to support technology industries. So would the state attract investments and establish a specialized zone that would give Egypt the ability to be a pioneer here? Our wishes to the People's Republic Party, to the conference, to serve the Egyptian citizen, and we have a number of recommendations to share with the conference. We want to see more harmonization between monetary and economic policies, because they are the two faces of the same coin, and we wish that there would be more participation from the private sector and more foreign investors, because the private sector is the engine to developing the economy of any country. We wish that the conference would identify the main problems and to find solutions, in particular regarding increasing the production capacities of the Egyptian economy and achieving high level of self-sufficiency from food, as well as developing the production capabilities in industry, and confront obstacles to local industry and reduce the gap in the trade balance between imports and exports. In addition to making the Egyptian economy enjoy more resilience to crises, so long as it depends on industrial products or food products. The state ownership document is a very important one, because it identifies the role of the state in economy, a very important role related to enhancing the investment environment, enhancing competitiveness. The state is going to exit a number of economic sectors. So my question to the conference is the procedures and the government plan to deal with the problem of congestion in ports and the measures that would be made to liberate trade. The second question is the guarantees to be announced by the state regarding privatization, exiting economic sectors, and not to compete with the private sector. I wish you all success in the important conference you are attending. As a specialist in political sciences and not in economy, I have questions. The first is the economic conference is important due to the importance of discussing the trends of the Egyptian economy and the indicators of this economy's performance, as well as the impact on the citizens and the community, the role of the state, the role of the private sector, the sustainable development rates, the trade balance between imports and exports, the external debt and the internal debt, as well as reconsidering the methods of dealing with rescheduling these debts or putting a long-term plan. I have a question to the conference, which is how can you communicate with the public opinion in Egypt, because the citizens wait for the outcomes. So I hope that you would communicate with the public opinion to present to them the outcomes of the conference and the influence of them on the economic policies.
اسأله بس آخر يعني الزنقة اللي احنا فيها دي امتى؟
When this difficulty would come to an end, to where are we heading? What about the exports and the imports? The problem of wheat. We hear a lot about wheat. So would you please tell us how much wheat reserve do we have and what's the alternative? Would the prices keep increasing? What about the debts? Would we repay the debts through the projects we're implementing? What about unemployment? I myself cannot find a job. What is the plan to develop the Egyptian local products? We plant wheat and sell it to traders. The traders buy it at a lower price. When will the prices be lower? The electricity, the tomatoes, the onions, when things would be cheaper? The prices are increasing and the salaries are fixed. So what would the youth do? And when we are going to construct factories for tourism, since we are working in this field, what is the plan for this sector? I'm from Qena, and I gave birth to a boy after 40 years. Would I be reassured about my son? The sessions during this conference will answer all these questions. Distinguished guests, by this we came to the end of the opening session, and the sessions are going to start soon. Thank you, the President. Thank you all, and now we will take a short break, but before the break, We would like to ask the President if he has any comments to make. In the name of Allah, we'll take the break and I will get back here to talk to you. As this is an open discussion about Egypt and its conditions, and I want to talk from the perspective of the responsibility you gave to me. So we'll take a 10 minutes break and then we'll meet again and I will speak then.
صباح الخير يا دكتور اسماعيل.
صباح النور. آخر جزء في محاضرتنا ازاي اقتصادنا اتطور بعد ثورة يوليو 52 لغاية النهارده. اتفضل.
حضرتك اكيد تقصد ازاي اتدهور.
لا اتطور يا ضيف وتقدم كمان.
اتطور ازاي يا دكتور واحنا كنا بنسلف انجلترا